Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Early on in his dialogue, which is named the Gorgias after one of the main interlocutors of Socrates, and you could even say the pretext for having the dialogue in the first place at the house of Callicles, Socrates is going to speak with Gorgias himself. And Gorgias is this rhetorician who can also teach other people rhetoric, and they've talked a little bit already about the nature of the art and its morality. And now Socrates will make a kind of offhand comment that turns out to be incredibly insightful and important. And it applies even today to arguments that people get into with each other, whether in real life, or just purely virtual online places, or everything in between. It's when people start out discussing a topic and they start to get upset with each other and attribute all sorts of motives to the other person. And you could say, well, this is kind of basic human psychology that Socrates is sketching out, and it's something that we want to be aware of and on guard about this particular dynamic. And so Socrates is talking with Gorgias, and he's talking and saying, Gorgias, you're this kind of person. But we could also assume this is Socrates himself saying the same about himself. They're both experienced, and the Greek word for that is empirion, right? The word that we get empiricism from, experience, having seen things a lot. And experienced in what? In having, in holding, in observing discussions, many discussions actually. Polon, logon. Logos is a Greek term which can mean very important big things like reason or rationality or language or speech. But it also means particular communication instances, right? So speeches that people give, or discourses, or things that they write down, or conversations that they have with each other. And this is what he has in mind here, discussions or conversations. And he says that, you've observed, and the Greek word for that is kath eorakenai, right? This is a perfect of this verb, which is a composite. You've actually seen, you've looked down and observed these sorts of things. It's implying that there's a kind of detachment there as well. And what is he going to have seen? What does Socrates say that he and Gorgias have both observed? Well, the first thing is that a lot of people want to begin from definitions, right? Define this. What's your definition of this? And Socrates says, and he's completely right about this, speakers, people who are talking, can rarely define the subjects that they are literally, in the Greek, placing their hands upon, right? The things that they're going to be examining together. And a lot of times people will give definitions, and the definitions aren't really any good. They're tendentious. They're based on insufficient knowledge. So, finding real definitions is pretty tricky. And the Greek word for this, diorisammenoi, right? So, horos is boundary, or that's what we actually translate as definition. So the dio is kind of an intensifier here, right? They're not able to really wrap their linguistic chops around the things that they're supposed to be knowledgeable about. And notice, dioris menoi pros allelus. They're not able to do this in relation to each other. It's not just that they're not able to provide a definition. Lots of times people provide definitions in Socratic dialogues. They turn out to be not very good ones. You define in relation to your interlocutor, towards the person that you are having a conversation with, right? You're trying to get to the bottom of something together. And so because of this, they don't wind up engaging in, as the translation runs here, a little bit kind of elevated language. They don't wind up having mutual instruction and enlightenment. But it's actually much more, we could say straightforward in the Greek. We could call it mutual instruction or mutual teaching and learning. Matheontes, right? And didaxontes. So the didaxontes is the teaching, and the mathontes is the learning, right? And again, notice, heautus, right? In relation to each other. So again, Socrates is stressing that these situations are not just like somebody throwing a deluge of words at the other person and then waiting for the other person to respond. It's back and forth. You're trying to go somewhere with that person. And so, when we get to disputed matters, perihu amphis betete sosin, right? And this is, so the amphi, both, two sides, right? Having a amphibetosin here is a dispute, a debate. There are two sides, at least, to the story. So in the matter that they're actually disputing about with each other, one person may say that the other one speaks or says things or articulates, legein, a very important Greek word, wrongly, me orthos, literally not straight, but it also means incorrectly, right? Or unclearly, me saphos. Now pause for a second and think about online discussions where you see people over and over and over again accusing their opponents of getting things wrong, being unclear. Sometimes that's the case, sometimes not. If somebody says, I don't understand what you're saying, the way in which you're talking about this is less clear than it ought to be, you have a possibility there. You could say, let me see if I can re-explain it. Or you could start to get angry at the other person. And that is indeed what happens. And very interestingly, Socrates uses the plural here, right? And through the rest of this, they get angry, and the particular term for getting angry there, halapainousi, right? Which is coming from halapos, being difficult, being a pain in the ass to the other person, wanting to be a stickler about stuff, but also getting irritated with them. This isn't like a full-blown rage where you're wandering in and punching people and stepping on them or foaming at the mouth, but it's a kind of anger. So they get angry with each other. Why? Because they assume that the other person is speaking out of malice, or actually phonos, jealousy, envy, towards them, right? Towards what it is that they have to say. Now, why would you be envious? Well, you could be envious of the other person's time, attention that they're getting from other people. Why do they get to talk about this when I'm the expert? I know about it. Think about Thrasymachus and how angry he gets in Republic Book 1, listening to these dummies talk about the nature of justice and get it wrong when I've got the doctrine of justice. So people do get quite angry, and they think that the other person is speaking the way that they are to them out of some sort of malicious point of view. And what else is involved with this? Wanting to win. A sort of rivalry, right? As it has here, being more anxious for verbal victory. So philonykia is something that gets talked about quite a lot in Plato and in other virtue ethicists in ancient Greece. It means this tendency, literally it's a desire or a love for victory, to beat out other people. So you see this a lot in discussions, don't you? Some people just want to be right, and everybody else needs to be wrong unless they agree with them. Some people are more eager to score verbal, or you could say symbolic victories than do anything else. Some people just want to humiliate others. This is a common dynamic. And so you could feel that yourself towards the other person, or you could be attributing that to the other person, and then you're like, hey, I don't like that person over there who is trying to win and doesn't really care. This is the other part. Not really seeking to grasp the matters that are under discussion. And the word for seeking or investigating there, zetuntas, right? The word for seeking out, the word for investigating, right? So when we're actually having a good faith discussion, we're talking with other people, and they get to make their points, and we make our points, and we don't get too bound up with it being my point or your point. We're interested in seeking out the truth. Somebody who's motivated by philonykia, by this desire to succeed, to win, to be the dominant person, they're not so interested in the truth. It's great if things are true. It's great if things turn out to confirm their point of view, but they're perfectly fine also having their point of view acknowledged, but not being completely right, just people saying that it's right. And so Socrates says that this often ends in shameful behavior, aiskita behavior that is embarrassing, behavior that should be shameful to the people involved, and even verbal abuse. And the Greek word for this, loiderothentes, you could actually look at it as like placing abuse on the other person or hurling abuse at the other person. And this is, unfortunately, I would say just as common, maybe even more common in our own time in many of the engagements that we see. Bad faith engagements with other people is just as common or more common in our time than perhaps it was in the ancient Greece, in which Socrates is saying, hey, Gorgias, haven't you observed this dynamic happen over and over again? So there's a lot of handles by which we can pick this up. We can think about this as why people actually do get angry and irritated and hostile with each other in discussions. They don't, they pick topics that are kind of messy, and then they start attributing bad motivations rather than good motivations to the other people. Perhaps rightly, perhaps wrongly. They may also be subject to that themselves and projecting it onto the other person. And, we could also look at this as a dynamic that has to do with what it is that we ought to be doing in arguments or disputes with other people, and what it is that we easily can slip into or start attributing to other people, maybe because we ourselves are doing it. I don't need to go into examples because there are so many out there. I think you can figure out how to apply this quite easily. But you should be on guard against your own tendencies to do this, including attributing bad faith to other people when you might yourself be in bad faith in arguing, debating, investigating with them.